I was listening to a lot of atheist scholars, and I was now seeing this kind of skepticism about the different religions. I actually got to the point where I'm like, well, since I'm already looking into this, does God even exist? If I'm looking at this truth, why not go at that one if I'm looking at that? And that was another leap that I had to take while I was reading the Quran. There were different verses that actually helped me to get to that. One, it states many times in the Quran, and it's actually a very common theme, is that a lot of times Prophet Muhammad would go and present the religion to the people of Arabian lands at that time, or I guess it was Mecca. And what they would say is like, okay, why would we believe in you? We have been believing in this religion, in this way of life. We've been living like that for thousands of years, or 1,000 years, I don't know. And we have our ancestors, our fathers, and their fathers, and their fathers have all been following this religion. So why should we listen to you, this new person who came along? For me, that was also kind of interesting. It's like, do I really believe in this because my parents believed in it? That was one. Another thing, I was actually reading about Prophet Abraham in the Quran, and it states that Abraham was trying to basically reason who is God. And he starts to look at first, I guess, at the moon, and then he starts to think about it, and then it just basically goes through his arguments. It's like, okay, well, the moon cannot be God, and then he starts to do this for, I think it's the sun, and then he same goes through some arguments, and it's like, okay, the sun cannot be God, and it does this for other things, and eventually he reaches this conclusion. It's like, okay, God is basically that one, or in this case, Allah, or Yahweh. I also read the commentary on that, and actually we even talked about it. It's like, okay, well, some people might say, okay, wait, what happened? That Prophet Abraham was like doubting about God, about his religion, and that's a big issue. That's a big deal. But the commentary was like, okay, well, while you're in this phase of searching and thinking about it and thinking about your religion, that's perfectly fine to start to think about different aspects. But of course, when you have reached the conclusion, you should stick with it. But that reasoning phase, it's okay to think about these different things. And it actually talks about a lot of times in the Quran also, when the Prophet would talk to the people, is that, why don't you reason? There's actually a very strong emphasis on this, is that why don't you reason? Why don't you reason about this? Why don't you reason about God, the existence of God? Why don't you reason about these idols? Why don't you reason about these religions? The argument that your parents followed it is just not good enough. You need to reason. So for me, I was like, okay, I think that gave me good enough will power to be able to start to think about the existence of God himself. So I started looking at that. I started to look into different atheist scholars, specifically Richard Dawkins, and then I found Alex O'Connor. And I would say that when I first heard the arguments, it really shook me. I was really surprised. I was like, oh wow, maybe there is not a lot of argument for the existence of God. Interestingly, when I looked into more, there is not a lot of issue they have for the existence of some intelligent being who created the whole world, who is like this great mathematician and master of physics and everything, who created all these great laws of physics and everything, and created this whole universe and this beautiful whole thing. So they didn't have a lot of issue in accepting that, which I was like, okay, that's great. But what they had issue with was the existence of the Abrahamic God, the one who cares about humanity, the one who cares about the purpose for humanity, and sin and evil and good. One of the things I heard Richard Dawkins talk about was that he could not fathom this intelligent creator, who created this whole universe, to care about us. He's like, it's like illogical. It doesn't make sense that a God like that, or a being like that, would actually be interested in humans. It's like kind of petty that he's interested in this evil and good and all that. He'd be, more worried about these kind of smaller things where he has so many huge things to care about. And I was like, I don't think that's a good enough argument to say that that proves that God doesn't exist. Just because you cannot fathom that, why can't you fathom that? What is the issue with that? How do you know that this is illogical? Just because you as a human think it this way, that's illogical? I don't think that's a good enough an argument. And I don't think anyone, especially when you're talking about this amazing being, this being that has created the entire universe, that you have the ability to understand what that person thinks about. And of course, you can apply the same argument as like, okay, well, how do we know that he is caring about us? And that's perfectly fine, but I'm saying that this is the same argument that can be applied to the other side too. So that was really one of the things I saw, that there is an issue for the existence of the Abrahamic God who cares about humanity and everything. One other thing I should point out that there is a difference in Islam and Christianity is that, again, there might be other groups who believe differently, but in general, people I talked to and people I looked into, that Christianity, the belief is that this is about Earth, humans, and there is not a lot of discussion or a lot of room for Jesus or any kind of saving happening for any other life outside of Earth in the universe. However, for the Quran, there is no issue like that. There's even talk about there is life on the earth and in the heavens. So there is room for that. There could be life on other planets. There might be intelligent beings in other places we don't know. So the reason I'm pointing that out, because a lot of atheist apologists would bring this up, is like, okay, why does he really care about this? There's a very unlikely chance that there only intelligent life just on Earth and there's no intelligence outside of that. And I know the Christian side had to defend that. I'm just saying that the Quranic or the Islamic side did not have to worry about that. So I'm like, okay, well, at least that part I don't need to worry about. And the next set of arguments is that, okay, so why does he care about us? Why does he care about this evil and good? And for me, I was like, okay, well, I cannot tell you why God does something. I can't. How can I know? And actually, I was talking to a couple of my friends who were atheists, and they said similar kind of things. I was even talking like, okay, well, God gave us, humans this free will and to be able to choose this, and he would like us to choose good over evil, but he wanted to give us this free will to actually do that rather than making us puppets or like, kind of like robots that you just pre-program them and they just do exactly what you told them. And he wanted this free will and actually for them to choose to be with God and follow God. And they were like, okay, why does God want that? And I'm like, I don't know. How can I know that? What I started looking into further, it was like, okay, let's look at it from the aspect of what does it mean for a God who cares about humans to exist and to not exist? For me, it was like, okay, if God doesn't exist, there is no purpose for humanity. Simple as that. There is none. There is no justice. There is no final justice or anything like that. Everything is random, and that's it. There's basically nihilism. Now, of course, people can create a purpose for themselves, and they say, okay, well, this is not really nihilism. When I did the thinking on that, the only option was like, okay, if God doesn't exist, that's the path. And if God does exist, it at least points the path to, okay, having a purpose for humanity and more about justice and morality that could exist. And of course, like if you listen to atheist apologists, they would say, okay, well, that's fine. Yeah, exactly. I mean, everything is random. There's no reason to think about like, okay, well, there is final justice or anything. And I was like, it might be easy for anyone to sit in a privileged position to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, it's all random. And just because something bad is happening, well, there's no meaning to that. That's basically it. And I'm like, let's go and tell that to a person who might be starving, who might be very poor, or it might be in a country there is war or famine or whatever. There's like so many issues going on. And let's go and tell those people this particular thing. Then yeah, your life has no meaning. None. It's all random. It sucks. You're in this situation. It sucks. Oh, well, yeah. I'm like, because you're privileged, you're able to say this. And I guess everyone is, in this case, who is talking about this is privileged enough to talk about it, and they have the room to be able to discuss this. I'm like, it's just easy to say this when you have everything given to you, or you're more in a privileged situation like this. So an argument like this doesn't really work when you're talking about it like this. I mean, of course, you could say, well, it still doesn't prove that this kind of justice and morality or God exists. But I'm like, yeah, it doesn't prove that. But stating this as like, okay, well, I don't really care about all of this, and there's no purpose, and that's all. I'm like, that only happens when you're able to be in this privileged situation like that, and that's it. So that argument for me was kind of very weird, that they were able to just say this, okay, everything is just meaningless and we're all fine with it. I mean, the other thing was like, okay, why do we only care about just humans? We're so selfish, probably self-centered. That's why we think about it like this. And I'm like, well, first of all, again, from the chronic argument, it's actually not just about humans. Where there is other life where God can deal with them also in similar ways. There could be intelligent life like that. We cannot argue about that. But even if we do, let's just say, stick with the fact that, okay, we're so self-centered, that's why we think like this, and we want a purpose for us or something like that. I'm like, why do you care about this right now? Why do you care about this right now? What is the purpose behind all of this? Why don't you care about your fellow beings that are also in this random situation, who are in struggling situations, and let's go and tell them, like, yeah, your life has no meaning. I'm just saying that this aspect that you're just talking about, that you're discussing very much about this, isn't this very also self-centered? This whole aspect of like, okay, yeah, you know what? We need to be a little less self-centered and think about like, okay, well, we live in this great, amazing universe, and we're happy to be in this and all that. And I'm like, yeah, but it also has a meaning for you, and that actually does have a very strong meaning for everyone. And it looks like you're not willing to accept that. You're not willing to accept the consequences of what you're actually saying that you believe. If God exists, who cares about humans, and who cares about this aspect of evil and good and the concept of morality, one, okay, we know that we have this free will to choose good and evil, which is, okay, that's great. We have the fact. Awesome. The other thing is, if he does care about us, then he must tell us what to do and what not to do, how to be good or evil, how to follow him, what it means to be like him, what it means to be able to follow him. And if we cannot find something reliable like that, then we just don't have enough information to believe a God like that exists. Or if he does exist, then there is like a logical fallacy, is that, okay, well, if you do care about us so much, then why didn't you give us all this information to be able to actually follow you, or to be able to live the life in the form of good and evil ways? So for me, I was like, okay, then we need these candidates. And we know the candidates that exist in the world right now. There's Christianity, Islam, the big ones, and then there are other candidates, Buddhism, and of course you have other, like Hinduism, and then there are many other candidates that basically are for, this is what provides me the option of how to be good or evil, or how to be following God. Those are the candidates. And if none of them are actually reliable, or none of them actually can be trusted, or none of them can actually really be followed, and none of them really provide me this morality, then we're done. Then I guess that we're back to the same fact that, okay, maybe that God doesn't exist, because if he really did, he would have cared enough for us to tell us this. So then the option is to go to these candidates. So if I can find a candidate that is the most trustworthy option, and if that's the most viable option, if that's the one that provides me the purpose of humanity, what is the purpose of humans on earth, what is the purpose of all of our lives, that is the one. The one that provides me the true meaning of life. That's the one I care about. That's the one I want to follow. And here, I am willing to accept the most viable candidate. It doesn't have to be the perfect candidate, it has to be the most viable. Of course, considering the fact that we also still have candidate, that means that there is no God like that. So now, for me, requirement for evidence for all of these religions, or all of these candidate religions, become a little stronger. The fact that, yes, I would like to have this leap of faith to be able to believe, but I'm already taking this leap of faith that God exists, and God that actually cares about us, and who cares about this humanity and evil and good exists. So it now would depend how many more leaps of faith I have to take to actually get to this belief. Because if I have to keep taking leaps of faith all the time, then where there's reasoning kind of crumbles. And if that's truly the case, then my belief is really based on all of the basically just nothing. It's just a lot of beliefs combined together, a lot of leaps of faith combined together to build my belief. And in that case, I really have to question and reason. Is like, okay, is that kind of religion really a better option based on the intellect and based on everything that God has given me to accept, or the fact that perhaps God like that doesn't exist? And why am I taking all of these leaps of faith?